welcome to this week's Daily Chronicle. Today is Friday, March 14th, 2025. Scientists are engineering a sense of touch for people who are paralyzed. Keith Thomas, who lives with paralysis, poses with the research team at Northwell Health's Feinstein Institute for Medical Research that worked with him for months to restore lasting movement and feeling in his arm and hand. The double neural bypass system uses brain implants and artificial intelligence to allow signals to and from Thomas's brain to bypass the site of his injury. In 2014, engineering professor Chad Bouton got a lesson on the importance of touch. Bouton, an engineer at the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research on Long Island, had developed a brain-computer interface that allowed a man living with paralysis to control one hand. He was trying to pick something up and said, Chad, I can't feel this object," Bouton says. At that moment, we realized, wow, that's what we need to work on next. More than a decade later, Bouton's team at Feinstein, a part of Northwell Health, is testing a system that can restore both movement and sensation in a paralyzed hand. It is producing benefits that persist even when the user is no longer connected. The first person to try the new system was Keith Thomas, who was left paralyzed and without sensation from the chest down after a diving accident in 2020. "They hooked me up to the machine and I felt my index finger," Thomas says. "It was like, whoa." A double neural bypass. In 2023, the team at Feinstein implanted 2 sets of computer chips in Thomas's brain. One set detects signals coming from areas that control movement. The others deliver signals to areas that process touch and pressure. These chips are wired to twin pedestals on Thomas's head, which allows his brain to interact with an array of electronics needed to animate his right hand. Right now, this happens only in Bouton's lab, where Thomas spends several hours twice a week. The technology is all part of what Bouton calls a double neural bypass. The first branch bypasses the damaged area of Thomas's spinal cord. We are literally rerouting signals from the brain to muscles that are affected. Bouton says this branch of the bypass also carries signals back to the brain from sensors on Thomas's palm, thumb, and index finger. But that's just half the story. We have a second branch that reconnects the brain to the spinal cord. Bouton says, as someone thinks about moving again, we stimulate the spinal cord based on their thoughts. This spinal stimulation, which occurs in sync with stimulation of the relevant muscles, amplifies and strengthens the remaining natural connections between the brain and an infected limb. A team effort. It takes about half a dozen people and a room full of equipment to animate Thomas's right hand for a few hours. "The first thing we do is greet him with a smile," says project manager Irona Ibrosi. "We say, 'Hey, what's up? Thank you for coming.' Then electrical engineers Aniket Jangam and Zeev Elias screw on a pair of Neuroplex E adapters to the pedestals on Thomas's head. Next, they plug in cables that go to amplifiers, signal processors, and ultimately a computer. The system includes artificial intelligence that has learned to recognize the brain waves Thomas produces when he thinks about moving his paralyzed hand. It also includes sensors that go to his palm, thumb, and index finger to provide a sense of touch. Once Thomas is wired up, the real work begins. During every session, we do mobility testing. We do strength testing, says Diana Fried, an occupational therapist. Research scientist Santosh Chand points to a monitor showing two animated hands. One indicates the motion Thomas is supposed to carry out. The other is controlled by Thomas's brain. He cannot move his own hand, but he's trying to do that, Chand says. The decoder figures out what he's thinking about and then controls the other hand on the screen. The decoder also sends signals to the muscles controlling Thomas's actual hand, causing it to move in sync with its on-screen avatar. Thomas has much better control of his hand when he is receiving feedback from the sensors on his hand. Chan says, "We are measuring is the force levels on the sensor," he says, "and then appropriately stimulating the right electrodes in the brain so that we make him feel a sensory percept at the right location on the hand." Lasting benefits. The double bypass allowed Thomas to feel his sister's hand when she made a visit to the lab. The sensation was like a rush of energy, he says. Another milestone came when the team put a cup of water in front of him. He lifted that cup up for the first time to his mouth, took a drink, and then set it back down all on his own without any help, Bhutan says. Over time, Thomas has also gotten better at interpreting the sensory feedback from his hand, even when he can see what it's touching. I'd be like, it's a tennis ball, or something heavier, or something lighter, he says. At first, the improvements were only present when Thomas was hooked up to the equipment in Bhutan's lab. But after more than a year of therapy and spinal stimulation, Thomas is able to do more and feel more at home. During a Zoom conversation, Thomas shows me how he can lift his arm up unassisted. His increased strength and mobility allow him to do things like pet his dog. And when he does, he says, "I can feel a little bit of the fur." What to know about this week's blood worm moon? Total eclipse. Total lunar eclipse. Light shines from a total lunar eclipse over Santa Monica Beach in California in 2021. Night owls across the U.S. and other parts of the world will be able to see the moon illuminated in a dusty red hue as it passes through the Earth's shadow later this week during the total lunar eclipse. Depending on your time zone, the celestial transit will occur Thursday evening or Friday morning and be visible in every U.S. state and other parts of the Western Hemisphere. This total lunar eclipse, the first time in 3 years, will feature a blood worm moon, so named after the reddish hue of its glow and the time of year it's occurring. Here's what you need to know. How to view the total lunar eclipse. The total lunar eclipse occurs when the sun, Earth, and moon align in a roughly a straight line, with Earth in the middle. This is also known as syzygy. The eclipse reaches totality as the full moon moves into the darkest parts of the Earth's shadow, called the umbra. People on the West Coast will see this week's total lunar eclipse beginning at 11:26 p.m. on Thursday, while those on the East Coast will see it at 2:26 a.m. Friday morning. Totality will last about 65 minutes. A partial eclipse will begin about an hour and 15 minutes before the total eclipse starts. A map created by NASA shows where on Earth this week's total lunar eclipse will be visible. A dark environment will give you the best view of the eclipse, which can be seen with the naked eye. But a pair of binoculars or telescope might make for a more impressive sight. Because the Earth's shadow will dim the radiance of the moon, you may also be able to see stars right next to the body's edge, according to Sky and Telescope. The magazine also noted that the top half of the moon may appear slightly brighter than the bottom half, since the moon won't be centered in Earth's umbra. The origin of the phrase worm moon. A full moon in March has historically been known as a worm moon, according to the Old Farmer's Almanac. That may be due to the emergence of earthworms around this year, as the weather warms up and spring nears. But the publication offers another explanation for the name. In the 1760s, Captain Jonathan Carver documented that some Native American tribes used it to mark the appearance of beetle larvae from thawing tree bark. Other names given to the March moon by various Native American tribes include the eagle moon, the goose moon, the crow comes back moon, the sugar moon, the wind strong moon, and the sore eyes moon, the almanac says. Why the moon will take on a blood red color. Even though it will be fully in the Earth's shadow, you'll still be able to see the moon. That's because it will be illuminated by light from the sun that passes through the edge of Earth's atmosphere and bends toward the moon. Long wavelength red light traveling through that part of the sky will project a reddish hue onto the moon. Long wavelength red light traveling through that part of the sky will project a reddish hue onto the moon, giving it the sanguine moniker. Or as NASA puts it, the reddish-brown or reddish-orange color of the moon comes from the glow of all the sunrises and sunsets on Earth. Exactly what shade of red the moon will assume may depend on how far into the umbra the moon travels. And what's present in Earth's atmosphere, such as clouds or dust at the time of the eclipse, Sky and Telescope say. Senate Democrats signal plans to advance GOP bill to avoid a government shutdown. Heard on All Things Considered. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, speaks during a press conference following a policy luncheon at the U.S. Capitol on March 11th. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, says he will vote to keep the government open, signaling a path for Democrats to vote with Republicans to overcome a filibuster in the Senate. and pass a 6-month spending bill ahead of a Friday deadline. Schumer delivered a lengthy speech explaining his decision to support the stopgap plan, known as Continuing Resolution, or CR. Speaking from the Senate floor on Thursday, Schumer argued that a shutdown would give President Trump more power and is a far worse option. As bad as passing the CR is, allowing Donald Trump to take even more power via a government shutdown is a far worse option, Schumer said. Schumer also said he believed Republicans would weaponize a shutdown to reopen only their favorite departments and agencies. He went on to say a shutdown is not a political game. In a follow-up conversation with reporters, Schumer would not say because how many Democrats will join him, but his support creates an opening for undecided members to vote yes. When asked explicitly if he had enough Democratic support, Schumer said members are making their own decisions right now. Democrats huddled behind closed doors Thursday afternoon to debate their plans ahead of a critical vote on whether to move forward on a House-passed spending bill to fund the government through the end of September. The Democratic Party's base is demanding they fight Trump and Elon Musk's rapid-fire cuts to the federal workforce and block the funding bill that was crafted without the party's input. It's unclear how Schumer's decision may square with Democratic voters. You have to make these decisions based on what is best for not only your party, but your country, Schumer told reporters. I believe that my members understand that I came to the conclusion and respect it. And so I think that people realize it's a tough choice, but realize I made the decision based on what I thought were the merits. In the hours leading up to Schumer's announcement, Democrats struggled to agree on a path, with members publicly announcing their opposition throughout the day. Two Senate Democrats up for re-election in 2026, Senators Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, and John Hickenlooper, Democrat from Colorado, said they would vote no on the GOP-backed measure. Many Democrats described the choice facing them as a pick-your-poison moment with no easy answer. Helping Republicans pass the CR avoids a shutdown, but blocking the bill could create other uncertainty. The Trump administration would have the power to decide which federal employees qualify as essential workers. Republicans could also choose to selectively advance funding for some parts of the government, while leaving others unfunded. House Democrats remained largely united in opposing the plan, and many took a social media to urge their Senate counterparts to do the same. Republican pressure continues. In a speech earlier in the day, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, blamed Schumer for creating the bind Democrats are facing. It's time for Democrats to fish or cut bait, Thune said in a speech on the Senate floor. We have 2 days until the government funding expires. And Democrats need to decide if they're going to support funding legislation that came over from the White House or if they're going to shut down the government. Thune said the House passed spending bill was the best option available. But Democrats say it is not that simple. Some worry about the unpredictable impact and length of a shutdown and what the plan would be to get out of one. Also weighing on Democrats hoping to regain control of at least one chamber of Congress in 2026 is the political impact. Republicans control the House, Senate, and White House. But Trump has a large microphone, and Senate Democrats will end up determining what happens. Senate Republicans hold a 53-seat majority, but likely need 8 Democratic votes in the GOP-led chamber to overcome a filibuster and pass the measure. Senate Republicans will see at least one defection because Kentucky GOP Senator Rand Paul said last week he would vote no on the plan unless it could codify cuts led by Musk. Before Schumer's remarks, only one Senate Democrat, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, had said publicly he would vote with the GOP to approve the stopgap plan. Fetterman said he wants to avoid a shutdown. That's chaos, and I will never vote for chaos.